Hello and welcome to Inside Resilion, Fast Tracking OT Cybersecurity Strategy. I'm Kara. I'm so glad you're here. Today, I'm bringing you the brilliant minds behind Resilion, Roger Hill, Chuck Tommey, and William Noto. By the time we wrap up, I truly believe you're going to see why we're so excited and how this could be a game changer for the future of OT cybersecurity. Thanks again for being here. Roger, I'll turn it over to you. Let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Wow, that was quite the intro, Kara. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Pleasure to have you, and we really appreciate your time. And I can tell you from this team, we're really excited to be talking about Resilion, which is really a moment of unwrapping this gift that we've been working on very diligently. So my name is Roger Hill. I am one of the founders here at Hillstrong Group Security, and with me today is Bill and Chuck. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, great to be here with you, Roger.
Yeah, really excited for today.
Absolutely. This is an exciting moment of going from a vision and toiling the efforts and really sharing what is this vision that we've built out. So first of all, I think, Bill, I've got to give you credit. You actually framed this, I think, the best way. When we look at OT security today, one of the things I think is really so exciting from a community perspective is over the last decade, as an example, there's been a lot of great technology companies emerge. So now, unlike a little over a decade ago, it's much easier to identify technical solutions to mitigate risk and build out OT security programs. The challenge, though, I think we all recognize is security is really about people, process, and technology, right?
Yeah.
Not just technology. So this is the point that I think Bill framed it really well. We built a technology for people and process.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
Bill, I think you probably framed it slightly, but
No, that was good. You got it.
all right, good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So I think that's really starting out with how we would characterize what we built. I think up until this point, we've really looked at the space, and as a community, we've really talked about visibility being the key problem. Visibility's a problem. I don't know that it's necessarily the key problem at this point. One of the challenges we've seen working with many different organizations across the globe is it's an execution problem. So when you engage from a consulting perspective, I'm sure you guys can echo this. The challenge is these organizations aren't able to really move the needle forward. There's many different reasons for that. One of the other challenges, I think, is the investments that have occurred up until this point. In terms of technology and solutions, there's been significant investments by companies. Now, I think boards and senior leadership are looking at where's the return, right? Did we make the right investments? And these are challenging questions. So this really leads us into some of the areas of information security in terms of governance, risk and compliance that we need to evolve to in terms of OT security. So when we look at OT governance today, it's fragmented at best. Our space very siloed. So that presents its own challenges. So what we set out to do is leverage technology today, because there's been definitely an evolution of technology, even in the last 18 months, that now we can leverage AI driven execution. What does that mean? I think what it is, number one, is providing that program owner, whether it's a director of OT security, an OT manager, or even somebody on the information security side for a smaller manufacturer, is somebody who is responsible for that program. They're the ones that are building this out. So we're providing that guidance of what we should have in terms of people and process, as well as technology for that OT security program across the fleet. So that's what we really want to set out to do. Now, there's a lot of good templates out there in terms of policies and procedures and things of that nature. And, I think Chuck can attest to that. He spent far too much time most recently developing a lot of the administrative control.
Yeah, the frustration factor is so high these days, both with the consultants, like us, and with the customer, right? That they're spending all this time and effort on policy, and then it doesn't go anywhere in the plant, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think one of the key focus areas is identifying what should be in place, but rather than just pointing to a recommendation or a template, what we actually do is we create it. We don't just create it, that we've come up with a unique way of breaking every document type into building blocks that map directly to standards, and then have internal crowdsourcing collaboration, which I know Bill's excited to walk you through some of this here in a few minutes. So we're excited to share a little bit more detail about Resilion today. So without further ado, Chuck, we already gave a little bit of an intro. How about we go ahead and talk about what Resilion really does for an end user in terms of the governance program, and what does that really mean?
Yeah. So there are so many reasons, right, that to be excited about bringing Resilion, to the OT market, right? But probably the biggest reason for me personally is really that enablement, operationalization. I can't even say the word. I'm so excited. That really makes it doable, right, for the average, even above average teams that are out there in the plant, right? So in my 30-ish years of consulting, the big thing that keeps projects from happening, right, from being fully realized and getting the full value out of a project is this GRC piece. We didn't in OT, we really never knew what that meant, right? We heard the IT guys talk about it, but now we're bringing it to the OT world in a way that's really going to enable them and help them, right? And get them to overcome the fact that, I've got limited time, I've got limited resources, I've been leaned out. Well, Resilion really can help fix that. So just as a brief kind of introduction, when we talk about OT GRC, really, what is that? Well, it's just really helping you figure out how to do governance, risk, and compliance on the OT side, right? So one of the things that Resilion helps with that is besides the kind of building the program, we're really helping operationalize that, right? We're helping you look at the governance of the program and how do we make that easier. One of the things we do is we look at a tiered approach, right? We talk about the fact that, hey, not every plant has the same value to the enterprise as every other plant. So let's think about it that way, and let's dedicate more resources towards the plants that have a higher importance within the plant or within the enterprise structure, right? So if you've got a plant that's making your highest profitable product, that probably is a tier 1. If you've got a plant that's supplying your biggest customer, that might be a tier 1. But you might also have a distribution center that is supplying multiple products to multiple customers, but there might be low rate, low profit margin, something like that, and that might be a tier 3. So, and by doing that, that allows us to really help you focus the energy where it needs to go. And we can do that, set up that tiered structure on a plant by plant or site by site. It could be, like we said, a distribution center, not necessarily have to be all plants that we're talking about from an OT perspective. So the other thing that Resilion does that really helps operationalize things is we have this notion of building a process flow, right? And doing that in a very detailed way that really helps step people through, this is what you're going to do in this process. And, where there's places that we need to make a decision, we call that out, and we have a RACI matrix that's already been defined that lays out the responsibilities, the approvers, the folks that are going to actually do the work. And so we know when we go to each step, who's responsible for what. That cuts out a lot of confusion that has caused delays in the past and on projects that I've been on. Finding somebody that's willing to raise their hand and say, yeah, I approve it, right, can take some time, especially in a plant that's, running 24/7 and very busy. And you have, also a lot of personnel changes. So keeping track of who's in charge of what can become really difficult also. So having this process flow is very important. One other key piece of this is that there's an evidence collection piece, right? So as you're going through and maybe doing an assessment, one of the things you want to do is show why you answer something in the way that you do. And so being able to pull in those artifacts, those evidence pieces is key. And then another thing, as part of a process, you may need a checklist. You may, like we talked about, have a RACI that you want to fill out for a specific task within a assessment. So we can add those different artifacts to that process, and it really makes it simple for somebody then to go through and follow the process, right? And operationalize the GRC part of security within the plant, which really lays that foundation. Once you have that GRC working, then everybody knows their job. They know what to do. They know where to go find the processes, the procedures, and they can then actually do the work with very little extra time, just figuring out what to do. So that's what I think is one of the really cool parts of Resilion.
So do you want to talk about the last section there, Chuck, of I think it's really interesting from a Resilient perspective of how we've approached building a process. So first of all, I think we all know a process is all about how do you actually follow a given policy, right? So you walked us through the visual building blocks. Maybe walk us through what is the outcome of these different building blocks and what gets created.
Yeah, sure. So another, thing, both making GRC easier, but also making working the program in the plant easier, right? Is having all these processes that are well defined, clearly defined, again, with those roles and responsibilities and in the RACI, and also a clear process put out, right? So we try to make it easy to actually build those processes, right? Writing Word documents till 2 a.m. is not fun for anybody, right? So what we want to do is make it as easy as possible and take as much time away from the actual practitioners, right? And build that into the program. And so what we did is we've broken down, all the common processes out there, whether it's how you do asset management, how you do vulnerability management, how you do an assessment. Any of that stuff is a procedure behind that, right? And so to build that process or procedure, we've broken it down into blocks, purpose and scope, roles and responsibilities, and we're going to fill those in for you for that type of process to start with. And then you can go through and say, yeah, that works for me. Well, I want to change this part a little bit and add more specifics of how we do it here. And then, when it's all done, the really cool thing is now, or even as you're building it, you can interact with your colleagues right within Resilion. And Bill's going to talk more about that later. But there's a feature in there where you can, bring in the SMEs or talk to the person that's going to approve it or review it and say, hey, is this what you're thinking? And are you agreeing with this while you're building it? So it doesn't take time later. You have to go back and redo it. So that's One of the really cool things about Resilion is having that way to build these procedures and processes in an easy, straightforward way.
Great.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Hey, thanks, Chuck. One thing that occurs to me is that what we've created here, there's an element of really being this document lifecycle management. And I think that's an important distinction because today, especially for OT security, a lot of organizations, maybe it's SharePoint, maybe it's just a OneDrive, who knows? But what we try to do is just really simplify even the review cycle of a given policy or procedure. And like you mentioned, Chuck, it's the who's the owner, who's the approver, and having a simplified mechanism of it's a single source of where does this live, and having that automatic notification of when to begin a review cycle, so that we're doing things in a consistent manner, and just simplifying, trying to make the limited number of resources at these organizations more efficient. On that note, I think, Bill, you're really excited to talk about some of the abilities in that regard.
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot, Roger. So are you going to queue up my images or?
Yes.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'll just say what I'm super excited to talk about is how Resilion helps you operationalize the OT security collaboration, right? So we're taking a bunch of disconnected tools and delivering embedded contextual execution. What do I mean by that? Context-aware communication can replace disconnected chat threads and email threads. So in Resilion, every object, your OT security policy, your business impact analysis and progress, a RACI matrix, a procedure, a checklist, whatever, an assessment, all of that has native comment threading embedded in it, right? So this means that discussions can happen directly within the item being reviewed or worked on. You don't have to switch tabs. You don't have to guess what document someone is referencing. You don't have to look up what's the most recent version of the document. So this built-in collaboration drives clarity on who's doing what, right? So with integrated RACI tagging, users can see who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed, and you can all agree on that. And that can be an item that's also reviewed and commented and audited and tracked and versioned, right? This eliminates the ambiguity that causes a lot of delays and missed actions in large OT programs. This is a key problem that we've seen in our consulting practice and within Hillstrong and outside Hillstrong. Consultants come in, create policies, create documents, do assessments, and a lot of times it sits in a drawer. No one can find it. No one's leveraging it, right? So we're giving this stuff a home where it can be worked on and collaborated on and communicated about. A big challenge that we're trying to address is cross-functional alignment that's built into the platform, right? So legal, risk, operations, all these teams can review and approve the OT security elements in the platform, and you can see change logs and approvals right there. So who signed off on this? The head of operations signed off on it? That's my boss. I never heard of this thing. Oh, well, the head of operations signed off on it. I guess I should pay attention, right? Like that's there. So following through is easier, right? Working collaboratively across functions that are and across plants that are regionally spread out, maybe in different countries, maybe in different poles. It's simplified if it all lives someplace. And yes, you could use SharePoint and create, your own intranet about this, but it's very hard to keep it up to date. Do people know where to find it? And which is the most recent version? We're trying to address all of that. So I'm gonna flip through some of the screens in a minute, but what we're trying to enable here is site level engagement, fleet level learning, right? So the site leads can attach evidence, they can comment on tasks, they can propose refinements within their own assessment programs. Central teams can review that in the context, gather the feedback. It all lives here, so we can report on it, right? We can create the ability to share up to the CISO, share up to the CEO, share up to the board. This is where we are with our program. So many CISOs we've seen have created these kinds of dashboards themselves over and over and over again. And you can, but wouldn't you rather just do the work? So this gives you the ability to do the work in one place without having to go and build all this stuff up from scratch. It's really powerful. So I'm, looking at this governance program screen, you can see here an overview of which documents are approved, which ones are under review. I just want to like show this in a little bit more detail. One of the things that's really cool is logging the approval chain, right? So in this screen, we're just showing like, look, it looks like Jennifer Walsh still has to sign off. I don't know, Roger, if you're going to talk about the AI Copilot, but let's make sure not to miss that.
Oh, that's all yours.
Okay, so we've built AI into this thing, not to go and run it without you, but to be an assistant to you to make you more efficient, right? So we're going to be helping you figure out how do all these standards and frameworks relate to one another? What are the common control elements across them? How do they tie to your corporate security policy that you've built here? And how does that tie to what you need to comply with from a regulatory perspective at the same point? I'm showing the act like in this OT access control policy, which was developed in Resilion, like there's a chat thread, various people can review it and comment on it. And jumping out of that into an execution element, now we're looking at an assessment in progress where you can see a chat thread going on about that assessment and the ability to put in evidence right there, right? So this is kind of the example where it's, you know, really trying to drive like a conversational ability around the work in one place, right? And that's so that you can communicate across to your peers, to your management, but also, you know, throughout the organization to all the sites. And so the site people can communicate to. I think, Roger, you're going to speak to that as well.
This is a huge time saver, right? I mean, when you think about all the hours spent in the plants on assessments, right? Sitting down in a meeting room with 10 people from the plant, you know, for 6 or 8 hours. If you can now break that down and each person only has to answer the questions that relate to them, huge time saver.
Yeah, you're not sitting around waiting for your turn.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And, you know, one thing I wanted to state is what we have with Resilion is a purpose-built system that is just 100% designed around efficiency and to be a force multiplier.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think there's a common theme with that I think we can all relate to here in OT security. So this is generally such a small organization. Sometimes it's a single person responsible for a global program. Sometimes, you know, they'll have teams under them, but the challenge is you have dotted lines of it's about influence to try to get things done, and it's a challenging environment today. What we really wanted to do is to make these limited organizations very efficient, and that it just helps them to be really a force multiplier and have a lot of virtual assistants helping them to drive consistent results. And I think that's kind of a common theme. You know, one thing I wanted to kind of set the stage with what Chuck and Bill have already talked about is, you know, Chuck spent some time talking about building the program, building that governance, risk, and compliance program for OT security, building out policies, procedures, things of that nature. And, you know, Bill just showed us some really interesting collaboration type capabilities. But the one thing I did want to point out is this isn't designed for somebody that has no program in place, right? What we haven't really addressed is if you are midway through your journey of OT security, you can upload your existing policies, procedures, charters, and what the system will do is actually analyze against your standard. Now, when I say your standard, what does that mean? So as a starting point, what we have the ability to do is just like the largest corporations do for OT security, is they will utilize frameworks and standards such as maybe NIST CSF or probably more to the point, IEC 62443, and define their OT standard. So that's where we start, is helping an organization do what these large companies have done, and it maybe took a year to become official. We want to be able to do that in days and weeks. So we provide a system that helps define and tailor an aspirational corporate OT security standard as your foundation for your organization. Why is this important? Because now this is what you can measure against your own standard that is designed for your company. So with that, what I would like to talk about is what is the next step, right? So we've got the ability, we built the program, but now we have this element of the sites, right? Maybe I have 100 sites in my fleet of operational sites. Some of those sites have multiple plants, even distribution centers, things of that nature. There's an element that we need to understand of what is the current state? What is that current baseline? And this is where the consulting game is. Let's do an assessment. Maybe we'll do a baseline assessment across a sampling of your facilities. And I think all the consulting firms, they all agree you should do this once a year, right?
Yeah, they
Of course
sure do.
they're going to agree. But listen, I'll be honest, this is where it's a challenge. If you have 100 sites across the globe, is it operationally realistic to do this once a year? You don't have the organization and you have limited budgets. And that's some of the challenges, I think. So what we've done is we've looked at assessments and we've defined within the assessment engine 2 main types. So first, there's the self-directed assessment. One of the built-in self-directed assessments is the plant baseline assessment. And you can think of this as about a 20-minute exercise where that OT program director, that owner of the program, can send out, once you've validated the number of sites, where these sites are, and who are the plant managers. Now you can onboard these plant managers and say, hey, listen, we've got a new program. You're going to see something hit in your inbox for an invitation. First, we'd ask for you to work with your teams on this. And then what it does is it will push out those messages where all the plant managers will jump into that self-directed assessment. Now, the idea of this is to really guide not the security standards in security speak. We all get caught up in that trap, right? One of the things Resilion does is it breaks down all of the security controls and or requirements into plain language that is directed at a persona. What does that mean, right? So what we'll do is we'll break down the questions to identify whether you have a control in place for that target, whether it's a plant manager or a maintenance manager or a safety officer at the plant or a plant local HR, right? Whatever the case may be. So what you're seeing here in terms of this example around authorized device inventory is we present multiple scenarios in plain language for that targeted role. I think in this example, we're actually looking at the plant manager. But we also provide what Bill mentioned earlier, the AI co-pilot. This gives the ability to have suggestions and you understand what's the rationale. Why is this important? So you can easily answer of, where we are today. Yes, we're doing a device inventory. The other thing that we do is we factor in how confident are you in that answer, right? Because that gets weighted into the end result. At this point, what we're really looking to understand across that fleet of 100 sites is what controls do they have in place and how well are they implemented, just as an inference-based starting point for our program, right? So with that, we go into the next stage of this of, okay, I'm the plant manager, Gary, right? And I just started this assessment. I have a couple of options now in order to work on this. And this isn't like an online test or anything like that, right? I can jump in and jump out as time permits because I am dealing with fire drills on a daily and hourly basis, right? So one of the things that I can do here is I can reach out to my peers of other plant managers with the contextualized question, like Bill mentioned, and say, hey, can you guys help me understand on this question 1? How did you approach this, right? But I also have the capability of within my team, and my team being the plant manager and the safety officer and local HR, maybe local IT, I can actually delegate a question. So I can select my team member, and it sends that assessment question right to that team member. So it's all about efficiency in how we're executing. Now, since this is distributed execution, the results get rolled up and aggregated up into our baseline to help us as the OT security director to define, okay, we know what our governance program is. We know what our targets are for the organization. Now we know the baseline of what controls are within that sampling of facilities. Now we can start to define, hey, what's our initiative for this year, right? So it's really aiding in that planning aspect. All right, now this is another interesting one. I think this is a pretty novel way of looking at a guided assessment. So what is a guided assessment, right? So think of this as more than just a human in the loop. So this is maybe you've got Frank or Susan, right? That they are the ones responsible. They're the OT program security director within a global manufacturer. What they can do now is, in terms of maybe it's establishing a baseline for their organization, and they want to do this with a maturity-based assessment. So what they can do is go in and select a framework, a standard, a starting point. Now, it could be Acme Chemical Program Standard that we talked about, or I can select NIST CSF 2.0. I can look at this from a C2M2 perspective. Whatever framework I select that, what the system is doing is the system is defining, what are the requirements and the controls to give a sense of level of effort, right? So as you select your framework, that's what you're going to use as your foundation for that guided assessment. Now, that guided assessment is again that same context of the system is now going to help you as Susan or Frank actually conduct these interviews, these workshops. So based upon your stakeholders that are involved in that working block, we're going to tailor the questions, the rationale, and the example scenarios for the people in that room, right? Also, the answers you're hearing from that dialogue back and forth is going to aid the assignment of that maturity-based scoring, level 1 through 5, right? Now, before all that, first we want to kind of just tailor the scope of that assessment. Now we've got the ability to define what is the framework. So in this case, we were using the NIST CSF 2.0, right? I can actually choose what controls I want to use. Now, the system automatically has the defaults of what are plant specific or what is organization. Think of that as more corporate, right? Or what is global scope. It's corporate and the plants. So this gives you the ability to tune this and save those defaults. What the system's also doing is providing some estimates of the overall level of effort. So it's a really good way to look at your tier 1 sites that Chuck mentioned earlier of how do we look at our critical core plants within our fleet of sites. That's where we want to have a guided assessment. Maybe that's part of one of our initiatives. In the next 12 months, we want these 10 sites to be assessed. What we're doing is helping Frank and Susan to be very, very efficient in that effort. Now, for a global organization, you're going to have many different types of assessments at any given time. There might be that initial baseline assessment. We can track that across regions, sites. We might have some of the maturity-based assessments. We can actually measure that. But we also will have the continuous, the follow-up assessments. We talk about doing this on an annual basis, right? One of the things that's really interesting about the information we're collecting, though, is that we have the ability to determine what is the lifespan of an assessment result, pending no significant changes. So in other words, let's say that we said that was 12 to 18 months, right? When we choose to do an assessment, we can choose any framework or standard. The system automatically has the mappings of all of the controls. So often with a new framework or standard, you can actually show a measurement comparison against another standard, and you already have the answers for your organization. It's 90% complete. If you want to show that full gap, there's only a 10% you have to actually fill that gap for. So that's the reusability of information is a very strong differentiation. And again, it's a force multiplier for the overall organization. So with that, I think we should get to some questions. So what do you guys think?
Sounds good.
Definitely.
So anything, Bill or Chuck, that you'd like to add before we go into some of the questions?
I mean, this is not a technical thing. I just want to comment on it. Like, you can clearly see how excited we are about what we're building here. So just gratitude to the audience for joining us and paying attention. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say there's so much in here that is built to, from my perspective, being the consultant, right, that comes in and helps somebody and spends a lot of time, but there's a lot of time, right, to do this human to human and meetings and all that travel that we've really tried to reduce to the absolute minimum, but still get quality data and actually get more data. So really a huge force multiplier, as Roger said many times, also efficiency gains, just making it easy, right? And not hard.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And with that, let's jump into some common questions that we've been getting over the last few weeks. And I think this is really interesting. So Chuck, I think this one will be for you and I mainly. But one common one we get is, we operate plants in multiple countries, and our assessments, they vary in quality, depth, and there's the challenges of being dependent upon the assessor. They've had assessments from the same organization, but different assessors and just completely different results. So the repeatability is just a huge one, right? So how does your platform ensure, a global consistency, both on that self-directed and guided assessments? I think the short answer from my perspective is that's exactly the gap that we designed for Resilion to close. So I think whether you're using a self-directed assessment model for your organization, and in terms of efficiency, or whether there's a site leader, whether it's an auditor or OT, director that's using the guided model, Resilion inherently provides the mechanism to increase the dependency and the repeatability of scoring across the organization. And I think that's one of the aspects of that, is because of the our IP of what we built into the agentic RAG database, and then that's kind of a little bit of our secret sauce. Chuck, what would you add to that from your perspective?
So I would use what may be kind of a buzzword right now, but I think this is the best example of it that I've seen in a long time, is the single source of truth, right? That's what we've really tried to make Resilion for anything OT cyber related, right? So you got the program in there, you know where to go look for what you're supposed to do, what the policies are, what the processes are, what the SOPs are. When you're doing assessments or audits, you have a central place where all that evidence is going. You have a central place for the process to do the audit. So from a consistency point of view, it's huge, right? Because it's going to be the same. And I think, Roger went over the two different types, right? The self-directed, where you're getting a set of questions and at different positions within the plant manager, the operations manager, the controls guy or gal, and that's all happening at once, distributed. So it really increases the speed, but it's happening very consistently across all the plants, all the sites, right? So that's huge, because you're getting the same questions answered, by the right people. And if you don't trust that initially, do the self-guided or the system guided, where you have a human in the loop, making sure that the answers that you're getting are complete and understandable. So you have two options, but again, all that evidence and all that, the answers end up in one spot, one single source of truth.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know what? I think another question that we get more on the OT side is, hey, policies are, they sound great at corporate, but it's operationally challenging to execute on the plant floor. How does your platform really ensure that standards actually translate into, well, just actionable? I would say that one of the things that probably didn't come out in that process builder, the unique approach that we've taken with the simplified visual building blocks of what defines that workflow. But behind the scenes there, for each one of those workflow elements, we're defining a centralized process that's repeatable, but then certain elements such as scope and things of that nature are locked at that corporate centralized perspective.
Yeah.
But we have an instantiation at that plant level, where when it goes to that plant, and that plant manager, Gary, for that plant, Gary can actually define who are the specific individuals and roles for the implementation of that change management process, right? So now what we can do is we can account for any of the localization and adaptable needs of that specific plant and where it can be tuned. Now, that is information and telemetry is being rolled up, so we can ensure that we're following that process. We're doing it in the most efficient manner. So I think that's kind of an interesting and novel approach I haven't seen out there in the market. Bill or Chuck, what do you guys want to add to that at all? Or
I mean, we just haven't seen this. We've seen some other sort of GRC things in the market, but they don't know anything about OT. There's nothing about the OT standards in them. There's nothing about 6443, et cetera, in them. And they're not using the latest technologies. Like,
yeah.
What we're building is sort of leapfrogging some things that were built years ago and not focused on OT. So,
I think that great points. And the idea that, I guess if I take a step back, why did we create Resilion, right? Was to really help do what we're doing as consultants out there, right? And really boil that down into a way that the system becomes the consultant in a lot of cases, right? There's a lot of Roger and Bill and some Chuck built into the system, into that AI and just the way it works to really streamline the process and again get that efficiency. So we really looked out there for other products, and we couldn't find anything that was maybe a piece here, a piece there, but nothing that brought it all together. So that's the other piece of Resilion, is really bringing all that different types of tools together in one place, where again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but the single source of truth, right? So
no, it's a good point, though. It's a good point. Bill, one of the things that we get some really detailed level discussions in the last few weeks, with some customers, is around metrics. And specifically, when we talk to leadership, what metrics do we think really resonate to really show the return on investment of a
Yep.
governance program? And I think that's interesting because I think in OT security today, return on investment is not in our vocabulary. It needs to be.
ROI is, yeah, it's always been challenging
Mhm.
in security, and it's particularly challenging in OT security. Look, execs, board members, they don't want to see a list of vulnerabilities. They want to understand impact, right? We're trying to translate governance into 3 big buckets here. So risk reduction. How much business risk is reduced as we close governance gaps? Can we show it by site, by control? We can. Maturity advancement. A measurable shift towards your target maturity level, site by site, control by control. And operational efficiency, right? Like, this stuff just takes a long time to do the old-fashioned way. Paying consulting hours for people to process documents seems very 2022. We can save a lot of time and cost with consistent process, fewer redundant audits, faster remediation. So there's a lot of inherent ROI there. When you can say, in the past 6 months, we reduced critical gaps by 35% across our highest impact sites, and we saved 1,200 hours of audit prep, that will get your CFO's attention. You'll be driving impact and achieving better security delivery.
Yeah, ultimately, it all comes down to making the business cases and getting investment to do the things that we know we need to do.
Yep.
I think another very common question we get is really hits your point on consistency, and that's balancing global consistency with really local operational realities. So, to frame it this way, with companies that have dozen or even hundreds of sites globally, how does Resilion keep governance consistent across those regions while allowing for local realities? So I think one of the best responses to that is the tiered approach for execution is a business-centric way to how to execute a global initiative across a fleet of sites. Specifically, as Chuck mentioned earlier, when we think about a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and quite simply, we can define it as tier 1 is your critical sites where maybe the output of what you're producing there at that factory is actually producing an input ingredient of your supply chain to 10 of your other sites. So losing that site is absolutely crucial, right? So we need to treat all of our sites as not being equal in terms of the business. So by defining these buckets of criticality in terms of business impact, we can start to define, okay, where should we make those initial investments and prioritization? And that allows us to really map and align with the global consistency. I think that's one of the first points. What would you add to that?
Well, because we keep talking about the global enterprise, right? There are issues, from a regulatory perspective that differ from region to region, right? We want to have a consistent program but then we also have to deal with those different regional requirements. And, in a large company, you may have some products that fall under, different regulatory agencies within a single geographic area, right? You may have something that's needs the FDA approval. You may have something that has EPA consequences. So, that's another thing that we track and make sure that the program is built in a way that it takes care of that, right? We know that you have plants in Europe, so you have to think about CRA or NIS2 or even individual country regulations. We know if you have a pharmaceutical plant, then it's going to have FDA implications, and you're going to have to be able to answer questions there. So, but again, it's all centralized. It's all coming from one spot and being governed, by the corporate program. So that keeps the consistency, even though there's different things you have to look at in different localities.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Chuck. I was just thinking, probably one of the more common questions we get is, and I love this one actually. It's about driving adoption without overload or overly burdening the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think how that is framed is even the best governance program can fail if adoption's poor. That's the reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you drive adoption across these different personas that we've been discussing? From plant engineers to executives without overwhelming them. Bill, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think we start by meeting people where they are, right? Since I've been engaged in this OT security world, there's always been this, there's been tensions between like the IT team and the OT team and the engineering team, and who's responsible for this, and don't touch it, it's mine, and you're going to break production, etc. I've always preached empathy and curiosity as like easy, free things you can do to build cross-functional like progress. Don't just say you can't because policy, but say like, why is it hard? Like, help me understand. I think if you show an interest across functions, people engage. So in terms of how we built that, we've tried to take those experiences into this thing from the ground up, right? So we try to meet people where they are. An engineer sees what's relevant to his or her or their job, right? Clear, concise, technical prompts. An executive gets a dashboard with trends and risks, not technical jargon, right? So nobody's buried in information they can't act on, right? Like that is using what we've used in our experience to try and make it tangible to real people doing real work, and not show them a bunch of stuff that's going to be in a different language that they don't understand and not be relevant to them.
I really like how you framed that, Bill.
Yeah.
I think it's about the mission, right? And this is something I talk to the manufacturing sector about quite often. As a manufacturer, your mission is to produce a product to your quality expectations, to the production numbers that you've set as your targets, and distribute that product to a point of sale and sell that product. Every other aspect and role within your organization is to support that primary mission. That's why you exist. So I think it's number one, understanding, okay, as a singular mission and bringing in the multifunction teams to really address this problem. Fundamentally, how Resilion drives adoption is we make everyone's job easier. One thing I've learned, if you want technology to be adopted, make me look smarter in my role and make my life easier. If you do so, I will be your champion. So we've tried to follow that simple approach of just allowing people to focus on what they really should be focusing on, and just being that force multiplier. So we can break some of the challenges in the space where, oh gosh, we've got another tax on the business. Here comes IT, here comes security. Here's another audit. Rather than thinking about an audit from a regulatory perspective, we try to frame it from, let's look at this from an internal compliance perspective, because that is how we are looking at reducing risk across our organization, and show that we're progressing, and be able to present this to senior leadership, this being the information. And that's another point, I think, is rather than a CISO or a director of OT security having to scramble on a quarterly basis to put together some board reporting slides, now the system can just generate, hey, this is exactly where we are. This is how we're tracking on our initiatives. And then one thing we haven't even discussed is being able to analyze the control effectiveness of the investments we've made on technical controls. So I think all of that wrapped together is a way that we can really drive adoption across the organization. But Bill, I think you put it really well. We meet people where they are and what their needs are. Thank you so much for joining, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this inside look at Resilion. We hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to thank you on behalf of Hillstrong and our panel, Roger, Chuck, and Bill, for joining in. If you have questions or want to see Resilion in action, please reach out to us at hillstrongsecurity.com or feel free to reach out on LinkedIn to any of us. Have a great day. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay resilient.
Stay resilient.